Welcome to Inspiring Heartfelt Conversations. My name is Barbara Morningstar. This series is presented by In Autumn's Cocoon, which offers education on a range of end-of-life topics in the form of talks, workshops, and courses. For more information, you can go to inautumnscocoon.com. Today, my guest is Josh Neufeld. Josh is a Vancouver-based portrait, marketing content, and documentary photographer, and the founder of Grief Narratives. After photographing and publicly sharing the last 19 days of his father's life, he found solace in the stories then shared with him. He built an online community resource called Grief Narratives. It is a space to share stories about loss and life, and for people to find communion and comfort in the universal experience of death and loss. Today, we will highlight the many faces of death, dying, and grief through his lovely photographs. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be here.
I've invited many other guests on, but I just want to thank you for accepting this invitation because we are going to be sharing photographs, but we're also going to be sharing your father's life and a very intimate time in your life with him. And so I want to hold that with the highest of respect and regard as we move more deeply into this conversation. But thank you for doing this because I know it's going to help a lot of people.
Again, thank you for having me.
Okay, so first, photography.
Yes, ma'am.
So you said that in one of your write-ups on your website that nature actually taught you how to use the camera. So can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I've always been, interested in, I've always been a big camper, a big backcountry explorer, stuff like that. And when I first decided to kind of pursue a career down photography, I decided to do that or learn to use my camera when I was out in the backcountry, camping, hiking, all that kind of stuff. And it just allows me to really appreciate those moments, like, things with sunset or sunrise. I mean, you get up for a sunrise, you're up well before dawn, and you just sit there and you're present for the whole thing as you watch it kind of unfold in your camera. And sometimes it's an incredibly disappointing sunrise. I mean, I've got up, I've hiked in the middle of the night to get up on a peak for sunrise, and then there's nothing, it's just clouds. But it allows me those moments to be more present in nature, and it's where I developed my ability with the camera.
Well, we also talked about, as we're moving into the images with your father, but that nature reflects the seasons of life as well, like everything is in nature. So can you speak to even noticing that or seeing that through the lens of your camera while out there?
Yeah, I mean, every photographer gets really quite excited around fall. I mean, the change of the seasons and the colors obviously bring a vibrance to images that are not necessarily found so much in the different parts of the year. But then going out in the middle of winter too, and just having a snowscape or a snow-covered mountain peak really brings home how much. And then being at that same peak in the summer really just reminds you about how we're all part of this cycle, and every year it still changes. I mean, even sitting next to a river, the feeling that I always get is it doesn't matter how long I'm going to be here or anyone's been here, this water is still running all the time. And I personally find comfort in that obviously, the world changes over a much longer period, but you get to really see those, I guess, really even experience and feel those cycles in a different way when you're out there. It's much more present and presents so much beauty to you as well.
Well, and as we're reflecting on this, we're going to be editing in some of the stunning photographs that you've taken. I have to say, We try to tell people about how beautiful it is where we live in British Columbia and in the Vancouver Island area. But when you see the photographs again, you're reminded of the gift of where we live and how beautiful it is. And I think a few times I said, where was that again? I think I need to go to that waterfall, or
Yeah.
whatever. So thank you for that gift too, to remind us of the art in nature itself. And it's how profound it can be to just go and be present to that artwork in so many forms, right? From
Yeah.
the mountains to the forests to the ocean. It's beautiful what you've captured.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the ones I really love that I was going to end sharing was this canoe by the wall. I think that's on Vancouver Island in the sunset. And I think it's really a beautiful image to lead into the conversation around end of life, because it's a lone canoe facing the sunset and it sort of captures the essence of that lone journey. But before we go more deeply into your dad, what then from nature you turned your lens to the human experience? What was that about for you? What called you to do that?
Yeah. Um, so I mean, like I said, like being able to create photographs in nature gives me a different kind of sense of presence when I'm out there. But after a couple of years of doing that, as satisfying as it is sitting on a mountain peak waiting for a sunrise or a sunset, they don't talk back to you. And I'm a very curious and social person,
Bit
and
lonely on the mountain peak.
exactly. And even before I picked up a camera, I knew I was kind of very interested in just experiencing the entirety of the human experience, and looking to get into work like that. So it was just a natural progression to want to then to start to actually photograph people and people's stories and develop that kind of pursue that more, like I said, as a career, but also just in terms of my own development as a person and my ability with the camera as well.
So then when did your uncle was not well? When did your uncle's illness, what was the influence of your uncle's illness on you?
So he battled Parkinson's and cancer for, I mean, about 5 years. And I have a really large family on that side, and part of them are in California. So it was around year 4, and he really wasn't doing well. And so we thought it was probably going to be his last Christmas. So we had a big family reunion down in Oceanside, California, and he was a lifelong pastor. So really well spoken, a good storyteller, a good teacher. And he sat the group of us, which must have been, I mean, with my aunts and uncles, my cousins, their kids, was probably 30, 40, 50 people all down in this little kind of basement, just rammed in there. And he spoke to us for about an hour about what it was like living with the terminal illness and really coming to terms with the fact that he didn't think he was going to see another Christmas, essentially. And I mean, you walk away from a conversation like that with someone who's engaging with their mortality so well, like you can't not feel inspired and like hopeful, I guess. And so when I came home from that trip, I wanted to build a project around that idea, a project in photography around the idea of terminal illness and mortality. And so I started to try to volunteer at a hospice. And my dad, who we had no idea that he was sick at that point, but him and I were buddies. He was my dad as much as he was my dad, but he was also one of my best friends. And he was a thinker and a mentor to me in terms of, I guess just thinking, as funny as that sounds. And so we were jamming out the idea, and he loved the idea. He thought it was a really good one. And he even named it. He's like, hey, why don't you call it Meeting Mortality? Because it has this, double play on words. And I thought that's great. And then little did I know, little did any of us know,
Mm.
he had a pain growing in his back, and it got worse and worse. And by the time he finally got some tests done, they found out it was cancer. And then diagnosis to death was under 2 months.
Wow.
He was diagnosed on July 13th, and he was dead on September 9th,
Wow.
in 2015. And just in this weird twist of, I don't want to call it fate, but this weird twist of irony, he became the subject of that project that was inspired by my uncle. Yeah.
So before we go further, what was your father's name? I always like to honor the name of the person, so we bring the full presence of that individual into the conversation.
Dietmar.
Dietmar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dietmar Neufeld.
Okay. So then what was that like to then turn the camera towards your father as the main subject?
Yeah. So, like when he was still at home, like kind of getting more and more news, because when we first found out it was cancer, so when we first found out he had a chicken egg sized tumor on his pancreas and an ostrich egg sized tumor on his liver. So we knew it was bad, but we were still pursuing options of chemo and this and that. But he just progressed quite rapidly, or the illness did. But I wasn't thinking about it too much at that point. He was still at the house. But then on August 20th, he went into the hospital. And he'd even said to my mom a couple days before, he's like, I don't want to go into the hospital because I don't think I'm going to come out.
Mm.
But what happened that night? Something happened, or we thought he was having a stroke or something like that. Spent the night on the emergency room floor with my mom, and and then they moved him up to the cancer ward. And at that point, I mean, I didn't bring my camera to the hospital because I thought, oh no, I can't do this. This can't be my dad, like, or my dad can't be the subject. Like, that's just too much. But then after a few days and chatting about it with my mom, and and the fact that my dad had already invested, so much of his own thought into this idea and really believed in it, we decided to bring the camera there and just witness it and just let it happen, let it play out, and however it would have played out.
And he was totally open to this?
Yeah. Yeah. It was so wild. He was the type, before he was sick, he would say for years, like, if I'm ever at the, end of a nurse's care, then take me out back and just behind the barn and put a bullet in me. And, but by the time it came around, I mean, he was just so gracious in accepting every single piece of the reality that came his way. I mean, even, when we're that first week when he's still in the cancer ward, we're looking at chemo options, and the doctor comes in and says, look, I'm sorry, but even the mildest form of chemo, like, he's just too weak for it. We're just going to move you down to the palliative ward. And so he walked himself down at Surrey Memorial. It's one long hallway. And he gets to palliative and he sits down in a chair and he's just kind of looking around the room, and he just says, I'm just amazed at how tired I am from just that little walk. But I guess that's what it is now. And then throughout the whole process of having me there, I mean, there's one photo that is, it never, when I've shown this work before, like, it never gets talked about, but to me, it's actually one of the most meaningful. And it was a moment, maybe 2 weeks in, he was only in the hospital for about 3 weeks, but where we had visitors coming in, and he was like, I have to trim my beard. I don't want to look scruffy. I don't want to look dingy for my visitors, for my friends. And he got up and he just started trimming his beard, and it maybe took him 10, 15 minutes, but I was behind him the whole time, taking photographs of him, and he didn't bat an eye. And before then, he would have never been, it's not that he wouldn't have been okay with it. It just, he would have been like, what's going on? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? But he just accepted this reality of his own mortality with such grace. for all of us that he was okay with it, and the images were just a part of that. But I mean, we had moments in the hospital where he's sitting on the bed, and we're all just kind of sitting around, just chatting as we do. And he goes, "Wait, shh, everyone, stop." And he sits up and he goes, "The toothless wonder wishes to speak and he farts."
Well, we're highlighting the black and white photographs. There were color ones. I have my Ansel Adams poster in honor of the depth of a black and white photograph, right? But there's something about the black and white and the way you've captured it. And I just love your sharing that moment, because there's some of them, and you can catch his essence. He was, the playful side of him. It's quite beautiful despite the circumstance, right?
Yeah.
So,
And that was his leadership. I mean, that was just him, like I said, kind of accepting each blow with grace, and then allowing me to just be present and allowing me to experience it fully as well. Well, all of us to experience it fully, but.
Well, can we just go back? You and I talked a little bit more deeply about the image of him shaving, and there was an intimacy in that for you with him. But also you talked about him being quite a strong man in and of himself in his life, and the progression of having to receive help. Can you talk to that a little bit more, how he eventually aligned with that part of the journey?
Yeah, I mean, it surprised us all, I think. The fact that he was just so willing, that he was so okay with the help that he needed in the end. I mean, there's another moment where even actually two of my close friends were there at the hospital at that time, and the nurses came in and said, "Oh, we have to take him. He needs basically a sponge shower, whatever you want to call it." And I don't remember what he said on the way in, but he goes in there with the nurses, and then he comes out and he's being wheeled in a wheelchair because he wasn't that mobile at that point. But the door opens and he puts both arms up and goes, "Behold, the king, rejuvenated, restored." He just kept this like silly attitude towards all of it right until the end. And he had these moments for sure. He would admit to being not afraid, but sad. He's not afraid of what was coming next, like in terms of whatever's on the other side. He was afraid of the pain he felt, because he had a bad pain in his back for so long. But I think just that acceptance that that pain's not going away because it had been there for a number of months, and that if he just accepts that help, it can go away. And there was no other road for him to go. It was just going to walk this road, and he was okay with it, and he was going to take the help along the way. And it was incredible to watch. Just someone face it with that much. I don't even want to say courage, because it's not courage. It was just this. I mean, it's just this beautiful acceptance, and I think that's important for people, because it's what we're all going to go through at some point, or what we all have gone through already in terms of losing someone.
Well, on that, you did a beautiful montage of the photographs with some writing on the website. And I just want to bridge to that, because there was one piece that you wrote. You're a beautiful writer, by the way. It was very heartfelt reading that. And I can see why it's touched so many people already. I'm getting my glasses on here. You said, "There's beauty in the reality that all humanity shares the same mortality, and beauty in understanding that mortality. There's a richness living in the acceptance that life is and life happens, and never without death. He brings the fate we all share, a fate we feel together." Look at you wrote that. Oh my gosh. Do you want to speak to that? I mean, just the beauty that you saw in this too. I mean, people don't often equate dying and the images with beauty. I know in my hospital, I try to say that to people. Sometimes they go, "What?" Can you speak to what you saw in that?
Yeah. So I think it was, I could be wrong here, but I think I'm 99% sure that it was my dad that said life is. I mean, I remember even before we went into the hospital, he was sitting on the couch at my mom's place, or their place, my mom's place. It's still funny when it comes out that way. Um, and he was just, yeah, sitting in the corner, and he was a car guy too. So he's just, it was kind of quiet. And I guess he had ordered like a new vehicle, and it had been quiet for a little bit. And he just says out loud, he's like, I'm gonna have to cancel that fucking car.
Oh.
um, but he had said at that point, it's just life is, and this is it. He's like, I wouldn't have. He's like, I'm sad. I thought I had a lot more years left, and it's changed everything. My mom and my dad were incredibly close right till the end. Um, and so, they had both had different expectations about the last, 30 some odd years of their life, or whatever it would have been, 20. um, but he just brought in this life is acceptance. And um, I think the fact that, so it was partly his grace in again, I keep going back to that word, but it's the most accurate word I've ever been able to come up with for it. But his grace in accepting it, but then also, um, part of sharing this in the way that I have only really solidified the fact that, that it is something that we all go together, or that we're all going through together. And there's so much beauty in that shared experience. Like, you're not alone in that pain, and it's painful, and you feel alone, and you're alone in the sense of, no one had the relationship that I had with my father. So, that's completely unique. And so that experience of grief is unique, but the feelings that come with that experience are not unique. They're so broad, and they're so shared by so many people. And to me, there's so much beauty in that there's a coming together around it. And that's really what I've held on to since I lost them.
Well, and even there's a beautiful picture. You're the lone male amongst all the daughters, right? But there's this gorgeous picture and he's got sunglasses on. We'll show it. And there's your beautiful sister. You have a gorgeous family, by the way, like the sisters and the mother. You're also photogenic, but he's in the middle, and there's these women all loving him up, and that's lovely. So you could see the connection and the love in the family unit. But then the ones too with your parents, there's a playful one with mom and dad in bed together, but the one that, of course, I lost my husband too. So it really touched where your mom's just really nestled up and touching him. And so the intimacy of their bond as husband and wife. Can you speak to what it was like to watch that depth of commitment and love in your parents at this time?
Oh, that's a tough one, because I mean, I still see it. Um,
Yeah, exactly. That's lovely. That in itself is a beautiful reflection, right?
yeah,
Because love never dies, they say,
yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, my parents always had a strong relationship, and so even in terms of my own life, I mean, if I want to picture like a strong relationship with a partner, it's, their relationship for sure that I want to model after. Um, my mom is similar in terms of, I mean, it's probably where I got it from. Well, and my dad was big on the human experience, but my mom was big. It was completely, committed to being present for all of it. So, I mean, even when even when he had passed, and we were in the hospice in the room, and the person came to take him away essentially. I was like, okay, mom, let's let the guy do her thing. And she said, no, like, I wanna be here, and I wanna see and be a part of all of this. So we stood, and then of course I stood with her. Um, so we stood in the room, and basically watched them wrap him up, and walked him out and down out of the hospice and into the back of the vehicle. And um My mom, yeah, she never faltered once on any of it. It was pretty incredible to see and to witness. I mean, the love that they had for each other. And I mean, to this day, it was, 6 years ago. I'm still so sad for my mom. The fact that she doesn't have that person with her anymore, and the whole end of her life, like I said, is now completely shifted from what she and they expected, because they were both going to retire and then do more traveling, kind of the classic thing. But but now that's gone, and that's too bad. But their love really overshadowed the presence of death in the room, I guess.
Hmm. Well, and we talked about you were in your late 20s when he died. You're in your mid 30s now. And what a gift. I hear people say, well, should we bring the younger children in, or how are the even younger adults going to deal with this? But you are giving such a profound example of how it's a part of life, and inviting the children, the family, everyone in to celebrate, which we used to do organically because we had births and deaths at home. But when you do that, you're inviting all the dimensions of life and enriching it in so many ways. And I don't think people see that or understand it, but your family is such a beautiful example of that. And your parents, how they held it and mentored all of you in the loving
Yeah.
and this whole experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The final picture, which I love that picture that we wanted to highlight, was here's your dad coming to the end of his life, and your mother's leaning over with this. I think his glasses are even up a bit when she's going to kiss him, and she's got a baby in her arms.
Yeah.
It's the cycle of life. Do you want to speak to that photograph? Because that's really profound.
Yeah.
Capturing of an image too.
Yeah, I mean, that was their second grandchild, Grayson. And I don't know what compelled mom to want to lean in for a kiss at that point with Grayson there cradled in her arm. But yeah, I just saw that kind of moment happening. And I mean, there's no way to deny that the parallels of life and death are not right there, so apparent in that photo. And I mean, I hope by showcasing that image, people are able to see tangibly that love exists in that tension between life and death. And again, I mean, I recognize how difficult death is. I really do. But there's still this love, there's still a tension there, because the grief you feel for that person only exists because the love you had for them. And then to see that with the second grandchild coming in, and one of my other sisters was pregnant at the time, and she was asking the doctors, like, how long, this is when we first got into the hospital, she said, my baby's due in November, do you think he's going to make it that long? And they said, no, we don't. And he didn't. But yeah, seeing those two together, I mean, like I said, it's such a tangible example of the two things are side by side, the life and death, and rebirth and growth. And
well, and I was going to read this quote at the end, but I'm going to share your words again, because you honestly, beautiful writer, Josh. It's not just photography. You got to keep up with both of them.
thank you.
This is your quote. You didn't know which quotes I was going to read, but death must, life is. Sounds too simple, right? Platitudes. Please hear me. I don't want to undermine, dismiss, or diminish the grief, the sorrow, the anger, the frustration, the loss, and the pissed off lying in death's wake. He's a heart-stealing, soul-sucking asshole, worthy of every word said and every song sung about him. There are no feelings like the feelings that follow death in his work. There are no words that dull or dim the force with which we feel his wrath. But he walks hand in hand with life. The two are inseparable and inextricable, celestial lovers bound in the flow of a river of eternal answers, together waiting to resolve our first and final questions, existing in a river that forms and erodes mountains of grief and joy within the landscapes of our lives. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And you've captured it so profoundly through your loved ones and your father's death. So
Yeah. Yeah. If you can feel, this sounds again too simple, but if you can feel, happiness and joy from bringing a baby into the world, I mean, there's something still, again, despite being so difficult, there's something still beautiful and joyful about losing someone, because that means you had them in your life, and that means they were if you feel strongly about their death, that means they were meaningful to you and they brought a lot to your life. So there's still something beautiful about it. Like they're two sides of the same coin. And to me, that coin is just love, as cliche or as bubblegum as that sounds. That's really how I see it.
Well, so then that moves so beautifully into the next part of the journey for you. Your father's now died. And tell me how Grief Narratives was born then out of all of this.
So when I, excuse me, when I shared the photos and the essay that you've been pulling the quotes from, I shared that on my personal website, on my photography website. Obviously there were, quite a few nerves that went with that. There was a while where I didn't even put the photos out there, thinking maybe it was just best reserved for our family. But again, because my dad had already put so much thought into this project and knew what the images were for, I decided to share it publicly. Excuse me. And when I did, what I was blown away to find was that so many other people were feeling the exact same thing I felt. So many other people reached out and shared their own story about, a lost loved one. And I found a lot of comfort in that. I found a lot of communion in that. I enjoyed the coming together over that story and understanding that, like I was saying earlier, you feel like when you're grieving, you feel like you're completely alone. And like I said, there's truth to that. But the reality is if you have a space to share your story with someone else who's gone through something similar, you'll find that so much of that story is so similar, is the same. And so many of those feelings are the same. And again, like I said, I found a lot of comfort in that. So I decided to build a space so that people could experience what I experienced. So I had my website to put the photos out there, but what I decided to do was build a website called Grief Narratives, so that people could share their own story and read other people's stories and find that same kind of feeling of comfort from that shared experience.
Well, and I've gone on the website and the the stories are breathtaking. And I think it's true too. Your courage, Brene Brown talks about vulnerability a lot these days, but your courage to be willing to share your story and be vulnerable in the writing and sharing the images, I think inspired others to have the courage to share, because even the way the stories are written, they parallel the depth of heartfelt vulnerability and authenticity that you invited in your story, right? So just going on that website is deeply moving. And as you say, the theme is in grief, they're honoring the love they felt with a range of different deaths too, right?
Yeah.
Young, old, babies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So very, very touching.
I mean, even to this day, when I receive a story, I obviously just get it through my email. But yeah, there's something that every time I'm grateful that they sent it in, because that means that they found some kind of connection or some kind of satisfaction in their grieving process. And then, of course, I would be crazy if I didn't recognize that for myself, this is all part of my grieving process as well. Like every single story, every single time I get to connect with someone over this, I mean, it carries on the life of my dad. So, yeah.
Honoring his legacy. Well, and you also were sharing with me that on one of the platforms you put it out on sort of innocently, you got so many responses and they were coming in different languages. You were having to use the translator. So there too is a beautiful celebration of the sensitivity and the beautiful celebration that loss and love and grief are universal. It doesn't matter what country or culture you're from, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it ended up out on a website that kind of went around the world. And at that time, yeah, I was waking up to messages in Italian and Polish and 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 yeah, for the most part, I mean, people just either sharing their own story and just saying thank you for putting this out there, that helped me. And that's awesome. Because
Right. Well, and you've captured, there's a couple of images we'll weave into this too. As you were sitting in person when people were sharing stories with you, you captured some photographs of the tenderness that's seen in their faces and body language as they're sharing their own intimate stories too, which is quite touching.
yeah, yeah, I wanted to build a portrait project around just those intimate moments where you can see that on their face that they're kind of connected to the other side or their grief in some way. And yeah, so I sat and interviewed those people. And what I found so shocking is a strong word, but what I found surprising about it was that, I mean, some of those people, I had never even met. I was just introduced to by a friend, and I'd go to their house or anything like that, and they'd sit and tell me these really intense, intimate stories about, someone they lost in their life, and open up to, a complete stranger. And what that really demonstrated to me was, the need for an outlet with grief and loss. And, we've talked about it previously, but just how it's, largely a taboo or a difficult topic for people to bring up. But given the opportunity, what I've found is that so many people are so willing to share their story. And to me, that's great because
Hmm.
that's where you can find the comfort.
Hmm. Well, and I support you in that reflection. We think people don't want to talk about it, but I know, like I said, I've started in hospice 30 years ago. I'm in the lineup of a bank or on a holiday or on a hike and I on a plane, and I just mention what might this it just pours out of people because you'll get this, you're safe, you're willing to listen. So, I have to be open because I'm
Yeah.
in my day, but it's quite moving to see, you also almost feel the hunger in people when you stand up for that, saying, oh, finally, I have a safe place. I can share this and reflect on this, and I will be seen in my grief and I will be heard. Right. So it's
Yeah.
important for us to do that for others and for those we care for. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, well put. I like that. The hunger and the people for it.
so global and cultures. Let's move into the next section. You're on a real journey here. You're inspired now. The next section is and it's hot. We're only going to show a few photos just to give a flavor. But if you go to the documentary section on your website, you start then going out into different cultures and countries to kind of try to get a sense of a taste of what the rituals are in different parts of the world. Can you talk about that journey a little bit more?
Yeah.
The Day of the Dead and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, So as I've, again, kind of moved through this process and obviously took the photos of my family, I really started thinking, again, kind of back to people needing an outlet, but also recognizing that there isn't one right way to do it. There are so many different ways. And then, I've just always been interested globally in different cultures and stuff like that. So then I started wondering, well, like how are people doing it around the world? Like we do this here in Canada and in the Western world, but what about somewhere in the middle of South America, for example? So um, I dovetailed that onto. So my dad was born in Paraguay, and he never got the chance to go back, and he had always wanted to. So I don't know if I had even told him that I was kind of planning to do it or what, but I mean, right when he died, I had a plan to go to Paraguay to go find that house that he grew up in and drop some ashes off there. And I actually took my mom down. I took her on her first backpacking trip.
Yay, mom.
So we ended up in northern Paraguay to do that, to find his house and drop some ashes off there, and then spent another month down in Paraguay and Peru, specifically with the goal of finding some different cultures or different areas where they do death a little bit differently. And I ended up in Peru for Day of the Dead. I'm going to bastardize the Spanish, but Dia de la Muertos or something like that. Where, I mean, in Mexico, you might have seen before, like it's a big party and a big parade and all of that. In Peru, it's a little bit different. It's a national holiday. Well, it's 2 days, actually. The 31st of October and November 1st, or it might be November 1st and November 2nd, but regardless. It's complete national holiday, so nobody has to go to work, and everybody goes and spends that day at the cemeteries with their loved ones, and they bring the food that they love, they bring the drinks that they love, they bring cleaning supplies, and they honor those people by cleaning off their mausoleums or their tombs, bringing flowers, sitting around, having a drink with them. There's bands, like roving bands through the cemetery that you can then just like tip or give, $1, and they'll sing songs for their loved ones. And, it was really beautiful just watching the individuals spend that time. I mean, I don't speak Spanish. I have a slight Spanish, but I mean, there's one gentleman who he shows up every single Sunday. It's his sister, and cleans it off and really just honors that. But what I felt really enamored by was the fact that this was a national holiday. And so in my family, on my dad's birthday, on my dad's death day, I mean, we get together as a family and we celebrate and honor him, but we do that kind of, siloed, because that day is his day. What's really beautiful about what they do in Peru is they pick those 2 days for the whole country to do it together. So I spent 2 days between 2 different cemeteries, one in Cusco, which was a bit of a more affluent neighborhood. So it was, basically the richer folks were there. And then I went out into the countryside and spent a day at a rural cemetery. And again, what was so beautiful about it is just this coming together of everybody. And there was another group in that second cemetery who, again, through very broken Spanish, the guy was the same age as me. He had lost his dad at the same time as me. And he's sitting there with their whole family. He's got, his parents, the grandkids, a big group of them, probably 15, and invites me in, and we have a beer, and we're just like sharing this moment of grief for our fathers through, again, very, very broken English. And to me, it was just so beautiful that there's, a country policy that says, let's take this time to get together as a community. You can roam around, you can visit other people, just as I was doing in the different areas, and spend time with their loved ones, knowing that you're grieving your own loved one. Like it was such a beautiful experience to be able to do that, to come together. And again, going back to the, finding comfort in the shared experience, it was exactly that. So it was a really beautiful time for my mom and I.
Well, and I know in Tom Golden, the conversation I recorded with Tom Golden on men's grief, he brought up the concept of a pilgrimage to a place. And so really it began as a pilgrimage with you and your mom in the ashes to honor your dad. And then, whoa, it opened up into this
Yeah.
amazing celebration and beautiful sharing with strangers on a shared theme, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah. And even in Paraguay, I mean, we had found that house. It was a 7-hour drive north, and we had to, it's like playing private eye trying to find the house, but we had succeeded, which was awesome. But then we ended up in a rural part of Paraguay too, and ended up at this family's home. They had just lost a brother, father, son, right around, my age. And they invited us into their home, and it was, this was in a very rural part of Paraguay. They're Guarani, so they didn't even speak Spanish. Guarani is the indigenous language there, and the indigenous people there. But they invited us right into their cookout, and we ate, in their kind of shanty. It was right in there helping them cook, and then it sat together with them, and it was just that whole month was just so beautiful, such a beautiful way to, yeah, kind of. I don't think I had that word for it at the time, but it was this pilgrimage to honor my father, and then just to continue to explore my own grief through a creative outlet, I guess.
well, and again, I just want to honor that because as I listen to you, it just seems so profound in how, as you're serving others, there's a transformation and a healing and a deepening in your heart through this whole thing. Do you want to speak to that in any other way? I mean, it just seems rich as I listen to you, right? Not taking away from the depth of pain, but when it opens to a shared experience, how rich it's become for you, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, I don't know. Like, again, going back to how my father kind of faced his own mortality, there's an element of, I can't turn away from that. Like, I'm not going to turn, like, if he can sit there and not be angry or upset about, his own imminent, death much earlier than he had thought. I mean, he was a sponsored cyclist for the Grand Fondo. Like, he was a very active fellow. It just hit him like that.
Mm.
So he was sad, but if he could face it with such, again, keep going back to grace, but if he could face it with such grace, I thought, well, I'm not going to be upset about this. I'm not going to be, I mean, I'm obviously, it was painful, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I'm not going to sit there and be sour about it. Um, I'm just going to this continue on this path that I didn't really know I was going to be on. But it's like, even with the idea of grief narratives, like when I thought of that idea, became one of those ideas that, sometimes things pop into your brain, and you just know you can't walk away from it.
Mhm.
It's kind of this whole experience that, that it's just something I need to keep mining in some way. And again, like I said, I mean, I'm well aware that it's also a way that I'm just continually, even 6 years later, trying to continue to process my own feelings of grief and loss. I mean, I still get quite sad
Mhm.
at his loss. I hate it. I do.
Mhm.
Um, but life is, death must, and I'd rather just do it together than be sour about it.
Right.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
Beyond answered my question. It was beautiful, and it is that sort of intricate dance and intimacy of joy and celebration and pain and the loss and grief and missing them, right? So, yeah, like you said, this celestial kind of dance and weave together of the two of them, right? So, also, just on the note of the cultures, on the Day of the Dead pictures, I think you had little ones and older ones, but I also think which is lovely, but the colors, oh my goodness, you think it's, "Ooh," but they have the colors that are just so vibrant as they're exploring this image of loved ones who've died, right? So, and having the musicians go around too. I didn't know they did that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It's a funny contrast between, you'd brought up like the black and white stuff with in another conversation we had with my father, and then this is quite the stark contrast to see all the color there. But I mean, again, to me, that just I put them in black and white. I've tried it, but I like them way better in color because they really do look at it as a celebration. And again, like I said, there's people there crying and managing in their own way and having their quiet contemplative contemplative moments, but it's really a celebration. I mean, you can walk around and just share a little glass of beer with someone you've never met and just cheers to your dads or whoever that person is. So it's this colorful, vibrant experience of grief that I found really captivating, I guess.
Well, and a true testament to how they're still honoring the importance of connection and community
Hmm.
when loss occurs. Because
Yeah,
there may be times when you need to isolate and self-reflect, but they've proven when people reach out and have connection, they do. And that's part of what ceremonies are for, is for the survivors
yeah,
to be seen and acknowledged and supported, right? In the
yeah.
years, the days, months, and years to come, right? So, yeah. Okay, so we're going to circle back to the concept of volunteering,
Right.
because you then ended up, this is touching too, and will be sensitive for people, but Canuck Place in Vancouver was one of the first. It's a beautiful mansion, old mansion they've renovated. And it was the first freestanding hospice for children in North America. And you are a volunteer there now to do end of life photography with children and their families. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. um I don't know what to say at all about all of that. Again, I mean, after losing my dad, I wanted to continue to explore what grief and grieving is like for people. And I had a connection because of the photos and the essay of my dad. I had a connection with someone at was it, I can't remember. We've talked about this. I can't remember if it was Canuck Place or a different place, but either way, she had brought up, about volunteering there, and I just thought, well, of course, like why wouldn't I do that? Um, but that, I mean, man, the photos, taking the photos of my dad and my family in those moments, brought obviously its own emotional challenges, but particularly the first one I did at Canuck Place. I mean, that experience was um, out of this world, I guess. Um, but I've talked to the person since briefly, well, the mother, and she's so happy she has those photos. And so, if as challenging as that was to be in the room for some of that, um, it, I'm happy that I can carry that and be able to give them something that they're going to feel fondly for, as they go through their own grief and grieving process.
Well, and you have such a gift for it. I know you're just beginning and deepening the exploration and the art of doing this, but even the ones with your father, they just capture the essence of it. So again, the black and whites even more so for some reason, just the essence of all of it. It's quite rich in all it sort of says through the images. So to do that with children, and had a colleague whose son and daughter-in-law had a stillborn baby, and they actually, I know you haven't done that yet, but you're on the roster if needed, but they actually did very tastefully done, images with the stillborn baby, which some people go, what? but they were so artfully done. And when I talked to my colleague about it, instead of the baby being whisked away because the mother had had that child in her for 9 months, it was because it was so artfully done and respectfully done, and they were given the grace to say hello before they had to say goodbye. That actually helped in their healing too. So it's
Yeah.
quite beautiful what you're offering there. So that leads into the final thing, your end of life photography course. And I
Mhm.
think you've mainly done that with hospices at this point, but you're offering people to come in, learn a little bit about photography, but also how do you do end of life, capturing of those moments. And you picked one in particular, I guess. I mean, you can tell us a little bit more about that course, but the one image in particular that was quite touching for you.
Yeah.
And she did say this was okay to share, my
Yes.
understanding. So, okay.
Yeah, so it's a grief photography workshop. So what I've really been thinking about lately is the importance of having a creative outlet in dealing with your grief. So it doesn't have to be a camera. I mean, a writing's is a more common one, I would say, and painting. And but when I started to think about the work that I've done and how, like I've said, I mean, how much building these different projects have helped me work through my own grief and given me answers to questions that I didn't even know I had. I thought it was the Hospice Society that reached out to me during COVID and said, "Hey, we're scrambling to find programs for our youth because of COVID limitations, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think about a grief photography workshop?" And I thought, that's brilliant, of course. Because like I said, in our grief, a creative outlet is such a great way to decrease the distance between our head and our heart. Like, we can get stuck in either one of them when you're grieving. And there's value to be mined by being in both of them. But by putting that through a creative process, I find you can find the balance between the two. So I developed this workshop to not so much on like how to create end of life photography, but more so, I have prompts so I give them a short lesson. I talk about the work that I've done. I give a lesson in photography and some of the really basics, and then I have a series of prompts to help spark, feelings of what's going on in terms of their own grieving process, and what are they finding challenging? Where are they finding joy? Anything like that. And then they go away. We meet 2 weeks later, and they go away with an assignment, and they come to the next part 2 of the workshop with photos to share with the group. And the idea is designed to put the grief process through the creative process, and then share it as a group. And in this one I did in November, one of the photos that was shared was just such a perfect example of why this can bring value to people, or why the creative outlet can bring value to people. So, the woman shared a story about her son. She had lost her 19-year-old son to cancer. And he was a big milk drinker. So she'd always have to have a 4-liter jug of milk. And so as she's telling the story, she said, when I walk through the milk aisle in the grocery store, that's where I break down the most, because I don't need to buy that milk for my son anymore. And, so what she did is she created this image. It was so beautiful. She went into the kitchen, she poured a glass of milk, and she got her child's bear, like his childhood kind of little stuffy bear. She spilled the milk because he was always a mess. And then she put the milk behind it, and she took a photo of this little kind of staged still life photo of the milk, and how, because of how that affects her in her grieving process. And to me, that was so beautiful. For her to, with the camera, recognize that challenge and that difficulty. And like, it's so often with grief, it's like those simple little things, like walking through a milk aisle knowing that you don't need to buy the milk you used to, that triggers things.
Grief burst is what Alan Wolf felt catches your heart, right? Didn't expect it, but whoa, the milk is doing me in the aisle right now.
So I've started offering those workshops as a way to do that, to offer a creative tool to process your grief and hopefully find, again, comfort in the shared experience of it. So like I said, the second part of the workshop is very much designed to share the photos and then share stories, to find that kind of communal experience again. But then also to have a new tool to play with as you deal with your own journey of grief and loss.
Beautiful. So I have two last questions. I always like to bring in the sort of spiritual, existential, invisible kind of realm of this. And I know that you come from quite a traditional religious family, but now you've entered into end of life with your dad and had your own grief journey after. Is this changed your perspective on the spiritual or existential component of death and life at all, or?
Well, no, I would say no. But I mean, I grew up in a religious family that my dad taught origins of Christianity, history of the Christian church, Greek and Roman mythology. But even by my early teens, I kind of unsubscribed to the dogma, if I want to put it that way. And so did my dad, to be honest. My dad taught it from a sociological perspective, not a theological perspective. So we've talked about it, but it wasn't exactly a traditionally religious home by any means. Even my dad, as he was at the end there, he said, we had so many hours to ask him so many questions. We asked him, what do you think's coming next? Like, do you believe in heaven, or what, where do you think you're going? And he said, he's like, I have no idea. But he said, whatever it is that's out there, just knows that I've been good. So he really wasn't worried about it. Now, as I've gone older, I found myself, so even in the 6 years since losing my dad, I found myself becoming more spiritual, but in a different way, and which is completely related. But I wouldn't say that, there is this, I think that it's more a process of growing older. And obviously, there's some of the work that I'm involved in, but I wouldn't say that there's like, a hard marker between a before and after for me. It's just been kind of a wandering journey, I guess. And that was a marker, but it didn't. It brought faith, I guess, in the sense of like, again, just watching my dad do it so gracefully that, it's going to be okay, regardless of what happens, like whenever you lose someone. But yeah, faith in that sense.
Yeah, no, I think the beauty of it is just like how you followed the pathway of this healing journey. The journey to the mystery, or the exploration of the mystery of life, really, if you're open, is unending.
Yeah.
To the day you die, right?
Yeah.
And beyond, potentially, for those who believe that. You also even shared you had some lovely dreams with your dad afterwards too, which
I have a ton of those.
Yeah. And were they helpful in the healing?
I don't know if helpful is the right word, but satisfying. The dreams that I've had recently, and I've been having a number of them, but inevitably, I've always been a fairly lucid dreamer. So inevitably, we come together, realize he's gone, realize I'm dreaming, but we get to just hug and sob like we're seeing each other again.
In the dream.
Yeah.
No.
So, that's been beautiful. And when it's, in the moment, it's as real as anything. And then you wake up. Like,
no.
But yeah, I've had some pretty intense dreams about him. But like I said, inevitably it just becomes an opportunity to see him again, which is awesome.
Well, another reflection of love never dying, right? And the
Yeah.
beauty of that. And the fact that you say it feels very real, because again, I did a conversation with Joshua Black on grief dreams, and he said there is often a different tone and quality to some of these dreams, and they do feel real.
Yeah.
It feels like you've had a true connection. That whole mystery thing,
Yeah.
right? It's quite beautiful.
Yeah.
So my final signature question, you great photographer and grief narrative platform maker, how has your heart been changed by this work?
I guess it's given me a deeper pool to pull from.
Mhm.
Because like I said, I mean, my interest and my heart's always been interested in how other people are doing life. But now, through this, I have a, I'm developing, I guess, a better understanding of something that we all go through, and something that, like I said earlier, here in the Western world is quite taboo. So it's just kind of, yeah, it's created it's deepened it, or it's enriched it with yeah, with a even going back to this spiritual piece, with like this, you know, transcendent experience. Um, so now at least I have a bit of an understanding of that. um, and then, with the response that I've received in terms of people sharing their own story, or can be quite it can be quite jarring sometimes. Sometimes I'll wake up and get a story from grief narratives, and it's first thing in the morning. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, am I really ready to go here now? But
Mhm.
just knowing that that work has reached people in the way that it has, I can't not feel enriched by that. So
Mhm.
I think that was a very roundabout way to answer your question, but I think I got there somewhere.
No, you did. It's beautiful. And what even in the moments you wake up, maybe thinking you're going to go hiking and the tender story comes in, the fact that you honor that, what a beautiful way to serve others, right? And we're all connected, and serving others, we're helping our own heart heal and integrate, right? So
Yeah.
I said that I would finish, and we're going to have it woven in with a photo of your dad. The one we picked, or I picked, I mean, together, I thought was beautiful because he was a professor too, right? So he has that kind of pensive look, but this beautiful kind of glint in his eye, kind of mischievous, even in those final days, with a beautiful smile.
Yeah.
So we honor him, and say his name again.
Dietmar Neufeld.
Yes. So in honor of your beautiful father, Dietmar, thank you for sharing this. And for those people who would like more information about Josh's work, his beautiful nature prints, again, inspire me to want to go to places that I haven't yet explored around here, and the gift of where we live, along with the profound work of capturing the many faces of death, dying, and grief. You can go to joshneufeldphotography.com. So thank you again for coming, Josh. It's actually, this has been a unique experiment, and we've been sort of learning as we go, but I'm just so grateful we got to do this together. It's been a really interesting, creative journey to be able to share this with other people. So thank you.
No, and again, thank you. I mean, I'm happy to sit here and chat and work this out over the last couple of weeks. But
Yeah,
I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm in good company. So I'm
great.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Okay.